Namaste everyone, I am your co-host Shravani ma'am. Welcome to your favorite learning channel. The topic for today's video is meristematic tissue. So in our previous video, we had learned that plant tissues are basically of two types, that is the meristematic and the permanent tissues. And this differentiation is based on the ability of the mature cells of the tissue to divide and produce new cells. So the meristematic tissue cells are capable of dividing, while the permanent tissues or the cells of the permanent tissues are not capable of dividing. Okay, so based on the capability of division, we had learned that plant tissues were of two types. So today we will be only focusing on meristematic tissues in detail, and in our next segments of video we would be looking at the permanent tissues as well. Okay. So in this section, we will be studying about the characteristics of meristematic tissues, the various ways of classifying the meristematic tissues, and we would look at the various types of meristematic tissues based on the classifications. Okay, and we will also study about the functions of meristematic tissues. So first, let's define this meristematic tissue. So what is this meristematic tissue, or how can we define it? So meristematic tissue is a group of identical cells. Okay, and these cells are in a continuous state of division. Okay, so the group of identical cells that are in a continuous state of division are called the meristematic tissues. Okay, so some cells produced by the meristematic tissues stop dividing. Okay, and they acquire certain changes and they get converted into permanent tissues. So this change that happens from the meristematic to the permanent tissue, this process of change is known as differentiation. Okay, so this is known as the process of differentiation. This happens when some cells that are produced by meristematic tissue stop dividing and they acquire certain changes that get converted into permanent tissue, and this process of change is known as differentiation. Okay, so now let's study about the characteristics of the meristematic tissues. So now we will be looking at the characteristics of meristematic tissues. Okay, so the first characteristic feature of meristematic cells is that these cells are the cells of meristematic tissue are either round, or they are oval, or they are polygonal, or they are rectangular in shape. Okay, then the next feature is that the cells of meristems are closely arranged in such a way that there are no intercellular spaces. That is, the meristematic cells, they do not have intercellular spaces. Intercellular spaces are absent. Intercellular spaces. So these cells, they do not have intercellular spaces because they are closely arranged. Then each meristematic cell possesses, so each of the meristematic cell, what do they possess? Each of the cell possesses dense cytoplasm. Okay, they have dense cytoplasm with a large and prominent nucleus. Okay. Then the fourth characteristic feature is that the meristematic cells contain smaller vacuoles. So these cells, they contain smaller vacuoles. Okay. And these vacuoles are scattered throughout the cytoplasm. They are scattered where? Throughout the cytoplasm, or even in some cases the vacuoles are completely absent, or in some cases what happens? These vacuoles are completely absent. Okay, so either these small vacuoles are scattered throughout the cytoplasm or they are completely absent in some cases. Next feature is that the cell wall of meristematic cells, so the cell wall of these meristematic cells is thin and elastic and is made of what? It is made of cellulose. Okay. Then the meristematic cells are living. So these cells, that is the meristematic cells, they are the living cells. Okay. So these are some of the characteristic features of meristematic cells. Okay. So now let's talk about the classification of the meristematic tissues. So there are two different ways in which we can classify the meristematic tissues. So first we will see on the basis of origin. So on the basis of origin, so based on the origin of meristematic tissues, they can be of two different types. Meristematic tissues, and this classification is based on the origin of meristematic tissue. So one type is the primary tissue, that is the primary meristematic tissue, and the second one is the secondary. Okay, the next one is the secondary meristematic tissue. Okay, so this primary meristematic tissue is the one that is derived directly. It is derived directly from the meristems, from the meristems of the embryo. Okay, so this is the primary meristematic tissue. Now what is secondary meristematic tissue? So the secondary meristematic tissues, they develop later in life. So these tissues, they develop later in life of the plant. And they derive from the permanent tissues. The permanent tissues. Okay, so these are the different meristematic tissues based on their origin. So now there is one more term called the promeristem. The promeristem. So what is this promeristem? So it is a group of young meristematic cells in its early embryonic stage that are present at the shoot and root tips of the plant, from which the other meristems are derived, and it forms the primary meristem in plants. Okay, so they are a group of young meristematic cells. Okay, and they are in their early embryonic stage, and they can be present at root and shoot tips of the plant, from which other meristems are derived. Okay, and they can form the primary meristem in plant. So this is called the promeristem. So now after this, let's see another way of classifying meristem. So this would be on the basis of the position of meristem. The meristem can be divided into three types, that is the apical meristem, then the intercalary meristem, and the third one is the lateral meristem. Okay, so now let's talk about each of them separately. So first let's begin with the apical meristem. Okay, so the apical meristems are found. Where are they found? They are found at the tips of roots, stem, and branches. Okay, then these apical meristem, these are responsible for the increase in length of plant. So they are responsible for what? For increase in plant length, or increase in length of the plant. Then further, these apical meristem, they help in the primary growth. They help in the primary growth of the plants. Okay, so these are the features of apical meristem. Then let's talk about the intercalary meristem. Okay, so the intercalary meristems, they are present in, where are they present? They are present in the nodal regions. They are present in the nodal region. Okay, and hence they are known as the intercalary meristem. So these meristems are prominently found in, or we can say that they are prominently found in monocots or monocotyledons like grasses. Okay, and they are present in between the permanent tissues. They are present in between the permanent tissues. Okay, then their main function or responsibility is to elongate the internodes. Okay, they help in elongation of internodes. So this is the primary function. Okay, so after intercalary meristem, let's move on to the next one, that is the lateral meristem. Okay, so the meristem that is present along the longitudinal axis of stem and root. So they are present. Where are they present? Along the longitudinal axis. Along the longitudinal axis, and this axis is of stem and root. So lateral meristem is present along the longitudinal axis of stem and root. And the vascular cambium and cork cambium are examples of lateral meristem. We can say that examples of lateral meristem would include vascular cambium and the cork cambium. Okay, and their function is that lateral meristems, they help in thickening. They help in thickening of stem and thickening of root. Okay, so this is their primary function. So these are the three different types of meristems or meristematic tissues based on the position of the meristem. Okay, so after these three types of meristematic tissues that we have learned based on their positions, now we will talk about the functions. The functions of meristematic tissue or meristematic tissues. Okay, so let's see what are the different functions performed by meristematic tissues. So these meristematic tissues, they actually act as parent tissues. Okay, they act as parent tissue and thus they help in the development of other tissues from it. Okay, then the next function is that the meristematic tissues, they are involved in the process of growth by developing. How are they involved in process of growth? By developing new cells. Okay, then we can say that meristematic tissues, they help plants to produce what? To produce new leaves, stems, roots, fruits, flowers, etc. Okay, then the next function is that the meristematic tissues also help the plant. They also help the plant in what? They also help plants to heal injuries. Okay, to heal the injury. How? by the formation of new cells in the injured place. Okay, so by forming new cells in the injured place, they help the plants to heal the injury. Then the next function is that the intercalary meristems they help the plant shoot, they help the shoot of the plant to grow upright. Okay, so these are some of the important functions that are performed by meristematic tissues. Okay, so now let's quickly revise everything that we have covered today. So today we have talked about the meristematic tissues and we have talked about these tissues in detail. So first we looked at the definition of meristematic tissue. So how can we define meristematic tissue? This tissue is a group of identical cells that are in a continuous state of division. So such identical state which are in continuous state of these type of identical cells that are in a continuous state of division are called meristematic tissues. So what happens is that some cells produced by meristematic tissues, they stop dividing and they acquire certain changes and they get converted into permanent tissues. So this change from meristematic to permanent tissue is known as differentiation. Then we looked at the characteristics of meristematic tissues. So these meristematic tissues, they have cells and these cells can be either round, oval, polygonal or rectangular in shape. Then these meristematic cells, they do not have intercellular spaces. They are arranged very close to each other and hence they do not have intercellular spaces. And each of the meristematic cells, they have dense cytoplasm and they have a large and prominent nucleus. Then the next feature is that they contain smaller vacuoles that are either scattered throughout the cytoplasm or in some cases these vacuoles are completely absent. Then the cell wall of these tissue, they are thin, elastic and is made up of cellulose. And these cells, that is the meristematic cells, are living cells. Okay. Then we talked about the various ways of classifying meristematic tissues. So first we saw the classification of meristematic tissues based on their origin. So based on their origin, the meristematic tissues are of two types. One is the primary meristematic tissue and the other is the secondary meristematic tissues. So what are primary meristematic tissues? These are those tissues that are derived directly from the meristems of embryo. Then the secondary meristematic tissues are those that develop later in the life of plant from the permanent tissues. Okay. Then there is another term called promeristem. So what are promeristem? So it is a group of young meristematic cells, okay, in its early embryonic stage, and these cells can be found or they can be present at the shoot and root tips of plant from which the other meristems are derived, and these promeristem, they form the primary meristem in plants. So this classification of primary and secondary meristematic tissue was based on the origin of meristematic tissues. Then we talked about another classification of meristem or meristematic tissue based on their position. So based on the position, the meristematic tissues are divided into three types. One is the apical meristem, next is the intercalary meristem, and then there is lateral meristem. So first we talked about the apical meristem. So these apical meristems are found in the tips of roots, stem and branches. They are responsible for increasing the plant length and they primarily help in the primary growth of plants. Okay. Then there are intercalary meristems, so they are present at the nodal region, and they are mainly or predominantly found in monocots like grasses. They are actually present between the permanent tissues and they mainly help in the elongation of internodes. Then we talked about the lateral meristem. So these meristems are present along the longitudinal axis of stems and roots. For example, the vascular cambium and cork cambium, and they mainly help in thickening of the stem and root. Then we discussed about the functions of meristematic tissues. So these meristematic tissues, they act as parent tissue and they help in the development of other tissues from them. Okay. Then these tissues are involved in the process of growth by developing new cells. And these tissues, they also help the plants to produce new leaves, stems, roots, fruits, flowers, etc. They also help the plants to heal from injury. How? By the formation of new cells in the place of injured cells. Then the intercalary meristems, they help the shoot of the plant to grow upright. So these are some of the important functions of meristematic tissues. So I hope you all would have got some great insights by watching today's video. Please do not forget to like and share the video. Till then, thank you for watching.